Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first Rebalance talk. We are very pleased to have with us Saskia Sassen for this first talk. As all of us know, the world was suddenly transformed in the last year into a political laboratory, so to speak, and radical policies constraining people's mobility were implemented all over the world. This unexpected experience gives us a new perspective of the world we live. I would like to revisit with Saskia some of the concepts that Saskia has developed during the last years, concepts that we often use to understand what's happening and to explain to ourselves what's happening. Concepts such as geography of power, denationalization, political assemblages, surveillance, security regimes, social exclusion, expulsions, third spaces, city articulation, city speech, and of course, global city. So Saskia, I will not waste time on introducing you because everybody knows you. Actually, everybody knows everybody. Just typing in Google the name of everybody, we can have full of information of everybody. So let me begin by asking one question we are very much interested to know. What are your interests right now? To what extent the pandemic has changed the way you think, your research methods? Uh, we know you always had an interest on destabilizing stable meanings,
Yeah.
always an interest on transdisciplinarity, on finding names for events and situations that seems invisible. Where are you in this
Right.
moment in
Well,
your interest?
yeah, those are very, very good question and comments. I think what really has struck me is how we have built very strong, it must be said, knowledge silos, many multiple knowledge silos. And so what I'm curious about now is the in-between spaces. If you produce that many knowledge silos, you're also going to have in-between spaces that are rendered invisible precisely because you have the knowledge silos. So I am very keen on capturing what is not mentioned, what is not discussed, what is not recognized. And it actually is more difficult than I expected it to be, because there is a lot of it. I think there is a lot of it. And every now and then we get a little alert. Something transversal, so to speak, in quotation marks, transversal, happens. You say, wow, how did that happen? And you begin to understand that there are certain negotiations among people, among animals, among climate issues, that we had forgotten a bit, because we have sort of the mother of them all, we events, but there are an extraordinary concentration of minor events that are, of course, easily overlooked and forgotten. And historically, we have been quite good, we humans, at overlooking sort of minor transversal elements that don't fit anywhere easily, or that we simply don't see, we don't recognize.
I
I
see.
could go on and on, but I won't do that to you.
Let me ask about some, I don't know if they are minor or major events related to pandemics. First, when the Mobile World Congress was canceled in Barcelona 1 year ago, it was canceled not because of a political decision, it was against uh, political and people decisions. It was just because large corporations like Intel and Amazon, so on and so forth, decided not to come. This was an event, an important event. And the second event is right now. The vaccines are made by large corporations worldwide. This is another event that maybe we will end up feeling that technology is the solution in a way. The information and data is shifted away from political institutions. In a way, authority, which is linked to power, already shifted away from democratic institutions in a way.
Right.
What do you
Yes.
think about?
Well, I think that we have, in the last, I would say the last 20 years, though it starts in my reading much earlier than that, but with minimal presence. But I think we have left behind a whole mix of elements that are part of our daily lives, but mostly of people who are poorer or the invisible, not the highly visible people, but so that there is a knowledge gap. We know a lot about those actors who play major roles, who are visible, those conditions that are innovations. We know a lot, and a lot has happened. What we have lost track of are the little things. How do the workers nowadays who have to travel 2 hours, how tired do they arrive at the office, and hence do not work very well? And the employers don't see it. They don't recognize that. And it's to their disadvantage that they don't. So, that is just one little example, but it really has struck me. I'm really interested in what we have not really studied, not analyzed. So I'm also very interested in how we have handled land and water bodies. There is a kind of a combination of elements that have suffered a kind of, that we forgot that they existed. Though if you are poor, you were more likely to be very aware of them. And so also, again, the question of the interaction of people and conditions. Because we now, in our major cities, we have up to 40% of residents who are very well off. They are not billionaires or millionaires, but they have good lives. They can buy what they want. They can have, they can have what they want. And so that comfort of the large middle class, a large middle class, is also generated a void in terms of all kinds of conditions, because there are fragilities in those middle classes as well, and they certainly have suffered those fragilities now with that virus in play. So we have lost grip, we have lost an understanding of what is happening to all kinds of people. When I say we, I mean we're really comfortable. We are academics, so we just stick close to our books. We don't find ourselves in very difficult situations because we're not out there, building something. So that is sort of a mix of elements, I would say. That is it's quite interesting when you think about it. A set of contradictions.
It's kind of a paradox, because sometimes
exactly.
we tend to believe that these corporations, Amazon, this digital world, they have data about ourselves, and you are saying that they are not, surveying our everything. That there are many things which are some were neglected.
Yeah, I think there is a zone of invisibility that has grown. That's one way, and it involves all kinds of things, and not just the big enterprises and us. It also involves materialities, and or the way we have had so much difficulty recognizing that we're destroying our own planet with some of our practices. Those are major, in your face events, but we didn't see it that way. We saw it as, oh yeah, I'll go take a trip at the other end of the world here, and why not? And now we are becoming aware that every move contains within it a possibility of a bit of loss, a bit of loss, so little that you can't see it, but it accumulates. And we are now have accumulated enough to become aware, some of us at least.
If you remember, maybe you remember that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, many famous sociologists used to say that there were more researchers analyzing the impacts of teleworking than teleworkers themselves 10, 15 years ago. Now
we are capable of that. We humans do that to ourselves.
Now this has changed. There are a lot of people, these middle class people are, many of millions are teleworking. We are teleworking.
Yeah.
So did you think about the impacts this may have in the ordinary lives of so many people?
Yeah. You asked me a question. or yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure. I mean, I think there is an enormous range variability. We know that some of the people who are on whose work we depend, to survive, whether it's taxi drivers or, whatever it might be, who are doing fine, and then others who are not. It's an invitation to rethink the little injustices that mark the lives of so many people in our big cities. And just as a footnote, we might want to return to it later or not. I am one of those who has now become convinced that we have to stop expanding our big cities. We, the middle classes, were doing okay, and certainly the rich in our big cities, we don't notice it. But we have more and more workers who have to travel long distances, who always arrive, men and women, old and young, who arrive tired at their jobs, and who, I mean, it's just, it shouldn't be that way. We have to restructure. So I have been debating with quite a few people, the notion that we need cities that are multinodal, many, many nodes. Paris, which is a huge city, is beginning to do that, right? The famous 15-minute city. So this is a very partial innovation. This is not a revolution, but it means that you will have, in a 15-minute walk, so to speak, that's the ideal. You can get what you need so that you don't have to depend, on going to, and that is just one example of how a minor change can make a lot of difference for a lot of the people we tend to not focus on or think about. We take them for granted, who really do suffer much more than we who mostly sit and write.
Okay, so do you think the smart cities should also be slower so that we don't have to go so fast from one place to another? This is feasible because of new technologies, because of teleworking, because of different economic arrangement, not to have to rush. In the sense that transport system until now had been defined to move as many people as possible, as fast as possible, as cheap as
Yeah,
possible.
yeah.
Do you
Right.
see that this is changing, this may change, that we can accept to be slower?
Well, I think we have a few little signals. Like a lot of the new generation are not interested in owning a car. If they need transport, they'll take a bus, or they'll have the money to also pay a taxi or something like that. So that is already, to me, a very interesting indication of something that has changed. It is a very visible moment. The question then becomes, what are the invisible moments that we're not picking up on that also are part of a transformation? And so I'm very interested, this notion of the Paris notion, that you can walk to a shop, which has more or less all the basics you need, not everything, but what you need in order to eat well and to, so that you don't have to take a long trip to the center of the city. I think that's excellent. And certainly it has been a bit, as you know, it's been a bit of a little revolution, the whole concept, like the 15-minute city, that you could just walk 15 minutes. I think it's beautiful. I think it's good for us to walk. I think it's good for a city to have this distributed situation rather than everything concentrating. And finally, what we often forget is the extent to which the poorer populations in our big cities, I'm talking about big cities now, the poorer populations in our big cities really often live pretty far from their jobs. And I find that just like double injustice, double harm. They already make little money. They live in fairly problematic situation, probably. And on top of that, they have to travel for an hour and a half or 2 hours in terrible traffic to get to their jobs every day of the week. I mean, we don't need anybody. And that for me is sort of one of the issues that we should think, how can we implement the change? And the French have taken a very simple concept that has gone global. It's sort of nice. That it's not the Americans. I really like that. It's
Let
the
me, let
French.
me, let me now make you the question that Andreas Faludi, a good friend, a colleague of us, also Alain Lostis, another colleague of us, as making in the Q&A section of the website. Are not we reinventing the neighborhood concept again? So this 15 minutes is not just another name for the neighborhood that
Yeah.
always existed.
Well, I think that it comes with a bigger hump and a bigger urgency. So it's not like, the neighborhood. No, it is recognizing I do not want to have to go into a bus or a train or drive my car in order to buy the elements of food. And if you are poorer, it takes even more significant positive, So I think it is different. And I think that the new generations, without us, the elders, the older, noticing it, the new generation has, I don't know if all of them have, but many, they have different concepts from us. They don't see the point very often of owning a car, except if your job demands it or there is a family question or like that. But they don't want to have cars. They prefer to rent something, when they have to do it. And my husband and me too, now for 30 years, we left our cars. We just want a car service, which we have now used for 30 years, in New York. And we have one in London too. That is the way to do. So, you don't have to deal with your car. It's just perfect. And I think that these are just little indicators of, a kind of transformation. I mean, we are not touching on the really serious stuff with all of this that we should also get to, like how we're building, which has often not very negative, for our health elements. The kind of materials that are getting used, there are many aspects when you really look at it that need to be addressed, that are perhaps really important for health questions and so that's yet another issue.
Yeah.
But we are becoming more aware. What I like is that we are at least, it's like step one. A mix of elements, the good and the bad.
Let me ask about the urbanizing technologies that you have mentioned in a number of papers. There is a sentence that I would like you to further develop.
Yeah.
You wrote, the more widespread the use of intelligent systems in a city, the more the city itself is at risk of becoming obsolete.
Yeah. Well, one of those, it's almost self-evident.
Why? Why?
Well, but I don't think that, I think that in our minds, it's self-evident, but at ground level, not necessarily. So let me elaborate on that. So in our minds, it's because it's like a self-evident option, it's something that we just, I don't know, it's like a natural way of understanding where we're at. In fact, I see, well, what I already mentioned, I see this very problematic condition of the low-income workers who have these very, very long trips. I think that is truly a negative, a profound negative. And it is to the disadvantage also of those employers, because those workers arrive tired, they leave dead tired, and the next morning they are again back tired. Nobody gains from that. It's insulting, it's unnecessary. We could change that. So that for me is one issue. Now, there is another point that I would like to make, and I alluded to it a bit earlier, which is, I think we have to stop expanding our big cities. The indifference about the expansion has to do with, the very prosperous middle classes and the rich who occupy a fairly broad central, but pretty central area, totally forget about the workers that sometimes travel for 2 hours in very crowded buses to get to their jobs. That is a kind of social injustice that we've got to confront. And we are seeing more and more accidents in the workplaces because these people are always tired. They can never sleep enough, those workers that I'm talking about. So those are major issues for me. Second major issue, we have to build new cities. This notion of expanding. I mean, this is to the advantage of the middle classes, the prosperous middle classes and the rich. They don't even notice that. but the rest has to travel distances that are absolutely, it shouldn't be that way. This notion that everything has to be in a few major cities, no, we have to redistribute. And that's going to be good on a whole range of conditions. You know, it's not just about health and travel, length of travel. It's just more humane, it's more interesting that you can really get to know your city moreover. You know, the Europeans have done much better. I know that Paris is huge and London is huge.
Not in relation to the world. I mean, Wuhan in China is bigger.
Yeah,
Bigger.
yeah.
So
But
small.
China is a thing on its own.
Yeah, I mean, of Latin America, you know, Sao Paulo.
Terrible. No, but I think that that's not good. You see,
Yeah, they're huge. So in Europe,
and the
they're small actually. Paris is small. Actually, in Paris, they already had the Ville Nouvelle strategy.
yes,
In London, the new towns. So
exactly. Yeah.
this has been already a policy in Europe, and polycentricity is kind of our own way of looking at the territory. But globalization is changing maybe this. So we see large European cities like Warsaw, like Madrid, like many cities, which are becoming global cities and becoming very big in relation to the rest of the country.
Yeah.
So even though they are not so big in
Right.
relation to the world, they are growing a lot.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. And it really also becomes a question then, what is it that is leading to this expansion of cities? Is it just a comfort question, you know, that, I don't want to move my enterprise to another city? I think we should rediscover mid-sized cities. You know, I don't want to live in one of them, but I think for many people, especially if you have children, you know, small children, etc., I think that we need to find ways. It's not going to be easy, that jobs are better distributed. Often the jobs are distributed in terms of what the heads of firms want.
Mhm.
And they just want what they want, and that's what they want. Well, hell no. We should really also contest that, and we should make a big deal, I think, out of the hardships of workers who travel, you know, who never sleep enough, men and women who never sleep enough. I mean, that is just not right. You know, that we know too much now about the importance of sleeping, you know, reasonable stuff there, that we should. And it's a kind of selfishness. But that also brings up the question, you know, why do we have a very limited number of huge cities that are the queens of the domain, globally speaking? And why can't we just redistribute some of that to cities that are, especially if we have older cities that are sort of slowly dying a bit, you know, why not reactivate? Now that's not easy. That is easier. That's easy to speak,
Yeah.
but not to do. There is no doubt about that. But I do think what we are seeing in the younger generations, especially if they have young children, is that they are liking going to mid-sized cities. You see a kind of return to the advantages of the mid-sized city. But we should have much more of that. And it would benefit the working classes quite a bit.
Yeah.
There would be an option.
In Europe, we see now a kind of division between large cities like
Yeah.
London and England, let's say, like Madrid and the empty Spain around, or Warsaw and the rest of Poland, and Budapest, and there is a kind of division between rural areas that tend to be more conservative, tend to be more nationalistic, tend to be
Yeah.
kind of more tend to vote populist anti-European parties, while
Yes.
while people in the large cities, more globalized, tend to be in favor of more liberal, more progressive policies. This is something that is happening
Yeah.
right now because of globalization, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think
But
about
you also have you have more and more young people who leave the big cities. I think it's
Move to the cities,
an
yes.
insufficiently recognized fact, is especially if they have children and they want to bike to their jobs, you know, they don't want to sit in a train or in a car. So you have an emergent population, if you want, that sees it a bit differently, especially if they have children. And that will make it, that will feed life into mid-sized cities, you know, because the risk is that the mid-sized cities really get run down. Like, I mean, Detroit in the United States is a classic example. Now Detroit is recovering, but you know, it's very difficult still.
I see.
Uh,
We have an interesting question, which is maybe the most famous question on the history of urban planning by Marian, a colleague from the ESPON program. She asked you, what is the ideal size of a city?
well, I
This is the
think,
question we are keep asking us
right,
the time
yeah. So
played
if I,
Aristotle, you know.
right, if I could execute what my concept would be, that would be great. But I know that it's unlikely to be executed. But I think that definitely the kinds of cities at Sao Paulo, you know, those kinds of cities, that is not the desirable mode. The desirable mode is a reasonable distance. Now, the concept of reasonable is going to vary enormously across different cultures. But we more or less could say that, no, that you see, even if you live at the edge of your city, that it is a reasonable, let's say 40 minutes in a good train, you know, or something like that. This endless expansion that, you know, the cities in Brazil, also in Argentina a bit, and certainly in other parts of the world, that is just, we don't need that. That in the long run, that's not good. In the long run, too many people suffer. In the long run, the pollution, even for the rich, they get affected by the pollution, you know, because you have a lot of cheap transport that isn't high quality, that produces a lot of negative fumes, etc., etc. I mean, when will we simply stand up and think about this? I think that for most people who live in comfortable parts of the city, these are not issues. They don't even think about them. They don't have time to think about them. They're rich enough that they have probably demanding jobs, and they, you know, they don't have time to think about these. But they're fine. They probably have very, whatever, you know, good situations. But the majority of people in our big cities now, those are the ones that worry me. I think this is a marker of social injustice. And we have got to deal with it. It's got to be named. It's got to be contested. And I repeat, I also think we should just make more mid-sized cities so that, you know, not everything is happening in the major cities. This is a distortion. This is not good.
Saskia,
You're laughing. Why?
let me introduce the governance of these territorialities we are talking, the political assemblages you have discussed in many papers and books. You know, in Europe, we have been seeing the emergence of let's say, all kind of new denationalized
Nationalizations.
territorialities, as you say, functional territories, we also call, such as metropolitan institutions of variable geometries, cross-border Euro regions, more or less efficient, macro regions as area of planning for many European policies and transnational cooperation. The European Union itself is a political assemblage. It's something which is moving, which is probably never is going to be finished, and has a border which is not very clear.
Yeah.
And also the Union for the Mediterranean. You know, you call all of these territorialities kind of complex institutionalization constituted through specific processes and arising out of struggles and competing interests, as you say. So Europe is probably a laboratory for this kind of complicated things. What is your understanding on what's happening? What do you think will happen in the future? Because it seems that in the pandemic, national states have reinforced the idea of border, the idea of control.
Yeah.
Your book, Lost Control, with a
Yeah.
question mark,
Losing control, right?
probably maybe they are trying to have the control back in a way. What do you think?
Well, I think what stands out for me, and of course it's a partial observation, uh, is that there's a kind of unsettlement. There are disagreements. Uh, there is an unsettlement about things that used to be sort of pretty fixed in one's imagination. Yes, I like this and that, and this is good, and this is bad. I think it might be the transitioning from one epoch to another. After all, in our complex environments and cities, it's not like it gets announced, okay, this is a new, no. We sort of gradually pick up on it, we experience the change, etc. But I do think that unsettlement is one marker, partly because more and more people are going to have difficulty getting housing that they wanted, disappointments, hurts, humiliations, all of that is in play in this. When you see, I mean, how many in the United States, a whole bunch of workers, like I'm thinking especially of a large number of women who, when they retired, suddenly could not afford housing because they had been renting. The rent was going up. I mean, this is in a rich country. The United States is a rich country. It doesn't mean that everybody's rich. I know that part. But the leadership should address some of these issues. I think we need to go back to a more reasonable modus operandi, where the legislators and the governments of cities, etc., actually say, okay, this is not acceptable. Europe has done a bit of this. This is not something that we are going to allow in terms of really degraded housing, for instance, for low-income workers. Piling up people, on top of each other, where they then all can get the coronavirus. I mean, it cannot go that way. Latin America is quite problematic, I think, in that sense, and so is the United States in its own way. So we must change something, and it's really several somethings, before it's too late. And we have really a lot of decay. A city like New York, sure, it has rebuilt certain areas, but it also has allowed a decay of areas that are sort of second-rate areas, so to speak, that is absolutely unacceptable in a city that has so many people, so many sources of wealth. So I would argue that we're running through a very problematic period right now when it comes to big cities and what happens at the edges of those cities where the poorer people live. I think that is an issue. Mm-hmm. That's a major issue. It's not the centers of the city. It's the edges of the city.
Okay, let's move to the surveillance technologies and the security.
Surveillance, yeah.
Let's move to this. We have seen in many Chinese cities all these sensors, all these facial recognition systems, all this control, which is maybe more surprising or not, is to see that many Chinese like that, in the sense that is protecting public health. And public health is a prevailing right. It's something that comes first. After comes intimacy, privacy, individual freedom, whatever. So, but on the other hand, when you analyze security regimes, I think that you are saying that this is not only happening in China, that let's say the US government in Washington, they have plenty of buildings, complexes for top secret intelligence work, that they have, plenty of corporate offices, buildings that have classified information. So it's not just Intel or Amazon that are cooking our data, but it's also the governments, the big governments themselves.
Yeah.
So what do you think about this? Is only these large countries, let's say, these powerful states like the US or China, or this is all over the world, governments try to compete against private corporations to get information on us as well.
Well, I think that's I just don't have the information on each country in this big world. But we know that when countries have governments that can afford to buy those there, and even when they can't afford it, they will buy those instruments, that allow them to spy on and to understand what's happening. But I think that some countries clearly stand out because they operate as if they were in a combat zone. So you must have all instruments, like the United States with its vast military apparatus, with its vast amounts. I mean, I was just looking at some data, I think I mentioned it already. We're talking about thousands and thousands of big buildings that are chock full with data gathering machineries, and they have hired, I am aware of at least 50 major firms. They have had to hire 50 major firms to also collect that information. Now that the instruments exist for capturing all the information, the United States government has gone ballistic, more or less. It starts 20 years ago. This is not new, but it has kept on growing. So that, to me, is just unacceptable. There are priorities that a government like the United States should be focused on that don't have to do with having the latest technology for spying on your population. So we are running in what I consider, if I may, we have a democratic system that is in deep decay. I'm not saying all countries do. I think the United States and a few others, it's not the only one. There is a decay at the level of leadership. That doesn't mean that there aren't great people and helpers and I don't know what all. No. I mean the leadership. And Obama did, whom I really liked a lot and respect a lot. Obama didn't do much about that. Obama allowed extraordinary invasions into the privacy. I mean, Obama is absolutely adorable, but the system is such that we have the tools now to do all kinds of things that are problematic. And the big question is, do we really need this? Wouldn't we be better off if we enabled the poor and those we see as dangerous, whatever, because they have nothing, who get angry? It's that, wouldn't we do better if we enabled those who are now poor and desperate, who don't know how to survive, who get angry, who might become killers because of all of that? We should, there should be a set of issues in play, a list of all the things that we must address. And I think right now, the United States started to lose the plot, and it already was losing it with Obama, no matter how wonderful a human being that is. That's my take. But okay. I'm a bit brutal. I'm Dutch, we Dutch can really be brutal. The Great East.
Okay, you Dutch can be brutal. So I come from the Mediterranean, and we can be disorganized and spontaneous. So what is going to be our life in these cities with all these surveillance technologies, security teams, so smart that only robots will be happy in these cities? So for us Mediterraneans, we will have very bad,
yes,
moments, because we will do all kind of mistakes and errors. Only robots will be able to do everything right in these smart cities, maybe.
But most robots right now, they still a little depend on us, on masters of, who regulate them.
But maybe
I don't know how
that's our behavior.
Our behavior,
to properly comply with all these controls we will have.
Yeah. Well, this is such a broad subject that I would have to, I'm sure that there are elements in that broad subject that you bring up that I'm not aware of. I will not claim that I know everything. But it does seem to me that we began to lose the plot, like just talking about the United States. About 20 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, we began to buy all kinds of military stuff that we're not using. We there was the rich became rich and totally indifferent to the more modest classes. I think we have lost ground, we in the United States, now I'm saying. And it's the rich have not suffered. We have an expanding class of very high income people. You know, it's like 20%, 30% in our big cities of very, very high income people. They are not the super millionaires, but that's a whole other category. But, you know, they are extremely, and they are often very, you know, factors and all of that. But they could be doing more. You know, they should be organizing. I think they don't have time, of course, but organizing themselves and saying, let's just figure out what is it in our city, let's say New York City, where I live, that we must address. I mean, look at in the United States, we have women who at, you know, whatever, 65 retired and are living on the street. I mean, California is famous for all of this. A lot of workers who were always workers and who are now homeless. We have also in New York. I mean, our government should focus on that, should say this is not possible in this rich country where there is so much wealth, where wealth has expanded, where we have more and more rich people, and the super rich are richer than they ever thought they would be. That is simply not on. And I'm just hoping that the new generations will have a sufficiently strong sort of community that they can begin to address it, especially if they also are in positions of power. We already are detecting some young people who are entering government who have a different view. They are far more oriented towards enabling the disadvantaged, you know, a recognition. Because by now we all know of people who have lost everything. They were serious people, they were serious workers. They lost everything because the technology has changed, the economics have changed. This is a very sad moment in that sense. You know, not for me, I'm totally fine, but for many people.
This is what in some papers you explain in terms of expulsion. So the system is today
Yeah.
does not need everybody to work or to consume. So
Right.
as we needed, let's say, as the system needed 1 century ago, when Henry Ford wanted all his workers to buy
exactly
a car. Now it seems that is not the situation. So there are many people which are not needed.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. That is one other element. You know, there are several elements in play here, and it's true that that is one of the elements. Also, right.
Okay. Let me ask now about the climate emergency, which is one of the subjects also you care a lot about.
Yeah.
And my question is, if we have to reverse the threats we know and we have scientific evidence about, kind of overwhelming evidence of the terrains we are facing, if we have to reverse these trends as fast as possible, it seems that we don't have much time for changing our values, even changing our behaviors. It seems that we have to use technology to do that, and we have to go as fast as possible to develop technologies to decarbonize the economy, to have renewable energies. So it's mostly a technological challenge, because the idea also you advocated to delegate back to the biosphere, to renaturalize the system. It takes time. Nature, it takes, it's not reacting as fast as apparently we need. So if we cannot wait, if we are in a hurry, then we have to invest a lot of technology. Otherwise, it seems unlikely that we can reverse all these trends.
Look, I think that we have multiple different vectors in play, so to say, if we want to make it a bit better, if you want to make it more reasonable. Some of them will require the technologies that you're speaking about, others will not. And we should not sacrifice those that will not, just simply because the technology cannot handle them. I think that we need to recognize that we're doing certain things wrong. And so, for instance, just to come back to this very simple example, I think we should stop expanding our big cities. We should shrink them a bit. just the big ones, the super big ones, because that will enable a lot of people to have a better life, a lot of the poor people to have a better life. Governments could enable that. The governments of a city, of a big city like New York, they could enable that, and that would be good. We need to enable people also who are ready to leave, say, New York City, because they have very long, because they are low income and they have to travel a lot, and to enable them to go to a smaller city where they might actually have a much better life. This notion that we are allowing our cities to expand. No, it shouldn't be that way, because at the edges there is so much pain and suffering and ill health, etc. The edges is a bit generic here as a term, but you know what I'm saying. So I think that there is really work to be done that can be done. Then there is work that needs to get done, which is going to be far more difficult. For instance, redistribution of income that the system such that, yes, it allows the rich to become richer and all of that, but that you really have to support certain families. Yet Europe does that. It may not be perfect, but it would not allow the miseries that we see in a country like the United States in its major cities. I mean, it's absolutely a scandal what is happening. And it seems that everybody's either suffering or so busy, or they're happy with their own lives, so they don't care what else happens. But it's a kind of almost impotence that you sense in the United States to change certain things. I'm just hoping that this new generation is up to the task. We're already seeing indications of that, right? I mean, being against the whole, destruction of climate and all of that. That's so very, very important that young people now, very young people, it's like a third generation. It's not the generation below mine. No. It's like 3 or 4 below me. Finally, we have young people who are serious about the environment. Well, being serious about the environment will get us quite far, because the environment is a very broad zone. It's not just one little whatever. And so I'm not in that, and I come back, I really think we should stop allowing our big super cities to expand. And we should build new cities. We should enable existing cities that could provide a good life, but that nobody thinks about, or everybody says, no, that's no good. No, enable those cities. I can imagine a leadership that really, puts up its whatever, and goes to work at it. I think it will have to be a very young leadership, because they are feeling it and they know it. I think I really like Biden a lot. He's a serious guy. He's very, there's a kind of gentleness, etc. But, we also need younger people who really know how difficult it is and who can help the leadership to say, these are the issues. If you just changed that, you could make a difference. Stop doing that, it will be better. Stuff like that. And there we are.
Yeah, you're optimistic this will happen. Do you think that measures from cities should rule the world in a way, so that the balance of power, political power between cities and between national state is kind of unbalanced? That all of these policies we are talking about will be better served if the power will rely more on cities than on national states.
Well, no, I don't necessarily think that, because cities can have leaderships that are rather egoistic, that want what they want and they don't care about the rest. So I wouldn't say that. But I do think that we need to recognize that something has broken. It's broken, and how do we address this break before it's really too late? I mean, I would argue that the United States, certainly cities like New York, etc., there is a bit of a decay happening. These are not radiant cities. They're not. They really are not. And we should We should take
Yeah.
it seriously, we should take it seriously. We'd say we are falling behind. I mean, European cities are much better than the American cities. And I love America, I mean, but so I think there is trouble on the horizon, and it will only get worse until it gets better. And getting better will, famous phrase, getting better will mean that the new generations have to deploy their idea. And you already see it in the bikes, there are far more bikes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before, they don't want a car, they rent a car when they need it. That's also very good, much better than owning a car.
We had an interesting question by Yannick Cornet that was just about what you are saying, Saskia, saying that expansion of large cities maybe is bad also for ecological issues because we are urbanizing land, but also new towns also is taking land. So from ecological terms, maybe the more sustainable would be to increase the density of large cities, which also will bring
Yeah,
problems in terms of
yeah,
public health, because for health, maybe it's better to have less density. So it's kind of a
yeah.
paradox.
Well, I mean, first in the rich cities that we have, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, there's a good sector of the population we don't need to worry about. They're doing very fine, thank you. And, but we want to recruit them to address the other half, where there is suffering, there's injustice. When you see women who are retire, they are 70 or 65, and they're on the street. I mean, this is what is happening in the United States. I mean, this is happening in San Francisco, it's happening in New York. I mean, what is this? That is not on. It's just not on. Something is failing. Something is not working, and we must accept that. But hey, it's not
We are
easy.
talking on this conversation a lot, Saskia, on the size and the distribution of land of cities.
Yeah.
On rebalance, we are also interested on not much on, I mean, not only on the space, but also on time, temporalities.
Right.
Okay. So do you think that changing the paradigm, let's say, of large city for a slow city, so the concept of a slow, do you think has a potential potentiality as a revolutionary concept because it seems that it's modernity. So
Yeah.
when you say I'm going to do that slowly, you have to do this thing perfectly. Otherwise, you don't have excuse. So being
Okay.
slow is
Yeah.
not positive. Being, the positive connotation is being
Right.
fast, like
Yeah.
telecommunications, like internet, being fast,
Yeah.
not waiting your time.
But people are changing. I think the new generations are changing.
So a
They are,
two-speed city is possible. A two-speed, meaning slow for people in the neighborhoods to walk, but fast in terms of hyper communication,
yeah,
global.
exactly. That's right. We have
It's
those two.
a good paradigm. It's a good
Yeah.
ideal.
Yes. Yeah. But we really have to recognize that just keeping expanding our cities, is not the way to go. It's just not, but it's going to be super difficult and almost impossible, to overcome that. I'm is even more lower people living the edge of these huge expanding cities. It's not right. I'm very glad to see, because now we have really established that quite a few people are leaving New York. They go to the Midwest, especially, we have a lot of small towns, a lot of universities, it's a very reasonable zone. You know what I'm talking about, right? The Midwest is so reasonable. It really is reasonable. But, we should enable. I think every municipal government in a major city like Chicago and New York should inquire, are there citizens who are living here? I mean, eliminate citizens. Are there people who are living here who would like to move to a smaller city where they can be safer with their children, where you know, etc., etc. I think many people would nowadays, the romance with the big city, it's finished to some extent, not completely, but it is no longer what it was. You know, I mean, a lot of the people who are now older in the 1960s, when New York was broke, New York was heaven. It was heaven because it was broke. So you had cheap housing, you had a lot of empty places where you could hang out. Well, we are past that. That is no longer existing here. Now it's just the opposite. And so, yeah, well, I think I'm now beginning to repeat myself, so I'm not going to finish that sentence.
But let me make you my last question. I mean,
Yeah.
On the one hand, when you're saying about going back to a small, medium-sized cities, actually what we have seen, we have been seeing on the pandemics. So people that were able to have a second house or able to, you know, have a family house in the countryside and spend these 2 3 months there, they had a much better life that, you know, people that had to remain at a small apartment with the whole family, with the children. This was awful.
Yeah.
So people realize that to have a small garden, to have some connection to nature is better.
Right.
That's right. So things are changing because of the pandemics in our experience. We are learning a lot of things. But do you think that our values are going to be influenced by this experience we have? Maybe we learn that we have to change, but maybe we will not change because our values, they are not changing as quickly, or our beliefs. So do you think that it's going to have an impact on our values, the pandemics, or we will just forget about, we forgot about the Second World War, and we forgot about the crisis in 2008, maybe. So
that's right. We have had several actually crises, right? So I think that yes, we are very good at forgetting what we want to forget. We humans are quite extraordinary at that. So that, yes, that will not go away, not anytime soon. But the most important factor is the new younger generations who are voting with their feet very often. They are leaving New York. I know that many young families are leaving New York City because it's too big, because it's too dirty, because. And they're trying to go, for instance, to the Midwest. The Midwest is a very reasonable zone with reasonable cities. Now, I do not necessarily want to move there, partly because I teach in New York, so I'm staying in New York. There might be a few other reasons for staying in New York, but we will leave that aside. So I think that some intelligence needs to be mobilized to create a better playing ground for a growing majority of people in the United States. And I'm thinking really it's a minority, because when you take the whole country, we have a lot of smaller cities in the United States, you know, that function more or less okay, actually. But, you know, there are some places which are really over and both at both ends, you know, the East and the West Coast, etc., where we really see suffering. We see a lot of homeless people, people who had jobs. You know, they are not the drunkard. It's not the old-fashioned drunkard. Lives homeless. There are many people who have had jobs. So there is something so unjust here. The injustice element should be actually named. It's not just, oh, there are some low-income people. No, the injustice that is being done to them. That is, I think, what should stand out, you know, because that is what it is. It is unjust and it is unnecessary in a country like the United States.
Thank you very much, Saskia. It was a great time with you. I have to accept that I had not time to ask you all the interesting questions our colleagues have been typing, but I thank them, all of them, for the questions, because they are precious input for us.
Send me the questions. I would be curious. Send me some.
I will send because, you know, sometimes I got one good question when we were talking of another issue.
Yeah. Of course, right. Yes.
I think it was an exciting, really exciting experience and an intellectual pleasure to have this time, to share this time with you, Saskia. So
Thank you very much.
this was recorded. I think now we were kind of 200 people. We didn't want a massive dissemination, but it's going to be published. So I hope plenty of people interested,
Wonderful.
students, and will
Wonderful.
listen.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time. I know you have another talk in just 1 minute, so.
Okay.
This is
Thank you very
we
much.
are always running and running and running, going fast.
Actually, sitting and sitting and sitting.
Yes.
If only I were running, that would be much better.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Muchas gracias.